The bull cried at the lake every morning, until a man in uniform returned after 20 years. The ground trembled beneath Elias's feet. A deafening bellow tore through the morning stillness as the black bull stormed out from the mist. His massive hooves crushed gravel and grass alike, scattering birds into the sky. The wooden porch of the Hollow Rock Inn shuddered as Brontis charged directly toward it, his eyes locked, furious and unblinking. At the top of the steps stood the stranger, motionless, silent, his coat swaying in the chill wind. 12-year-old Elias Arcos had only seconds to process what was happening. He'd been crouching behind the well across the road, watching as he did every morning, his notebook forgotten in his hands. This was no ordinary morning. Brontis was not staring at the lake today. He wasn't waiting. He was moving. Fast. The bull's breath came out in thick clouds as he tore across the clearing, horns angled downward like a battering ram. Elias's chest tightened, but the man on the porch didn't run. He didn't even flinch. Brontis stopped just inches away, his hooves grinding into the dirt with such force that mud sprayed across the inn's porch. The bull let out a harsh, guttural sound, half roar, half cry, as if every memory he'd buried for 20 years had come rushing back in one violent burst. His head lowered further, but this time it didn't threaten. It trembled. The stranger, who'd introduced himself to the innkeeper last night as Darren Cole, took a slow step forward. His limp was pronounced now, his right leg dragging just slightly, his eyes locked with the bull's. He raised one hand with deliberate calm, fingers open, not reaching, just acknowledging. Elias couldn't breathe. He stared at the two, man and beast, locked in a frozen moment that felt ancient, like a story playing out long after the rest of the world had forgotten. From the side of the road, the innkeeper, Mr. Briggs, shouted, "Hey, get back! That thing's wild!" But no one moved. Brontis's massive frame shook once. His breath hitched, and then, slowly, he dropped to his knees right there in the mud, head bowed, chest heaving. Elias clutched the edges of his notebook so tightly his knuckles went white. It hadn't started this way. For years, Brontis had done the same thing every morning, just stood by the edge of Lake Mirador as the fog rolled in. The villagers always said he was mourning someone, maybe another bull, maybe something stranger. Some laughed. Others avoided the lake entirely. But Elias had watched him nearly every morning for 3 years, ever since he moved in with his grandfather, Thomas Arcos. There was something about Brontis's stillness that fascinated him. Not sadness exactly, but patience. As if the bull was waiting for the world to remember something it had chosen to forget. Elias had grown obsessed. He drew Brontis over and over again. The horns, chipped and thick, the shaggy fur around his shoulders, the deep black eyes that somehow carried weight. One day, while sketching from the cover of a cypress tree, Elias noticed something he hadn't before. A mark, barely visible under old scars and dust. A crooked arrow burned into the bull's flank. He ran home, heart racing, and showed the sketch to Thomas. The old man squinted, then went pale. "That's no ranch brand," Thomas muttered, sinking into his chair. "That's a military mark, the Palisade Regiment." Elias frowned. "Military kept bulls?" "Not just bulls. They trained them," Thomas said, voice low. "Back when Palisade was still running secret field units out in these parts. Tracked terrain where machines couldn't. Brontis wasn't livestock. He was a soldier's partner." Elias stared. "Whose?" Tomas hesitated. Then, "Commander Royce Venler. Came through here 20 years ago. Tough as nails, but treated his bull like a brother. Then one day he vanished. Mission gone bad. Never came back. Dead? That's what they said. But no one ever found a body. Not his. Not the bull's either." Thomas looked up. Until now. Elias couldn't sleep that night. He flipped through every old newspaper and photo album his grandfather had stored in the attic. He found a grainy black and white photo pinned to the back of a stable ledger, Royce Venler, standing beside a younger Brontis. It was him, no question. The same deep eyes, the same crooked brand. And yet, no one had ever come back to claim the bull. The next morning, Elias left 3 apples on the lakeshore, halfway between the water and the tree line. He waited. Brontis looked at them. Didn't eat them, but looked. He arrived just after dusk, wearing a heavy coat and carrying only one worn bag. He checked into the Hollow Rock Inn under the name Darren Cole, paid in cash, said he was looking for old trails, whatever that meant. Most folks ignored him. Elias didn't. The man's limp, his build, the way he kept scanning the mountains like he was looking for ghosts. And the next morning, Brontis charged. "Now!" Elias stood frozen as Thomas came rushing from the general store, breathless and pale, eyes wide as he saw the bull collapsed in the mud at Royce's feet. "Sweet Lord," Thomas whispered. "It is him." Royce Venler turned slowly. His eyes found Thomas, then Elias. His expression was calm, but behind his weathered features was something darker, tired, cautious, ready for whatever might come next. You're supposed to be, Thomas began, then stopped himself. Dead? Royce said, his voice like gravel soaked in storm water. That's what they hoped. Brontis gave a low, aching grunt, like a sigh that had waited 20 years to escape. What happened? Elias asked. He stepped forward without thinking. Royce looked at him. Something about the boy's face, innocence maybe, or the same restlessness he'd once carried, made him soften slightly. They left me behind, he said, but Brontis didn't forget. No one spoke after that. Royce knelt in the mud beside the bull, placing one hand gently behind the scarred ear. The bull didn't flinch. If anything, he leaned into it. Why now? Thomas asked. Why come back after all these years? Royce didn't look up. Because I'm not running anymore. The wind shifted across the valley, stirring ripples across the lake's surface. For the first time in years, Brontis didn't turn toward the water. He stayed still, with his eyes closed, and beside him, Royce sat like a shadow returned to flesh. Elias felt something shift inside him, a question blooming without an answer, a story that was only beginning. But none of it explained what Brontis saw across the lake every morning, or why he waited so long. And tomorrow, the whole valley would be asking why the bull no longer cried. Because the next morning, everything changed. Brontis didn't cry. He charged, straight toward the inn. The charge never reached its target. Brontis skidded to a halt just inches from the porch of the Hollow Rock Inn, his hooves grinding deep into the earth, flinging dust and splinters across the wooden steps. His breath steamed into the morning air like smoke from a furnace. His chest rose and fell rapidly, muscles tense beneath his thick black hide, eyes locked on the man who stood still and unshaken before him. The man didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just stood there, legs apart for balance, shoulders squared. Darren Cole, at least that's what he'd called himself, met the bull's fury with calm resolve. His left hand hung at his side, fingers twitching only slightly. The other clutched his coat lapel as though bracing for an impact that never came. From the other end of the inn's gravel path, Thomas Arcos burst into view, out of breath, one arm holding tight to Elias's shoulder as they rushed forward. The boy stumbled, nearly falling, but Thomas didn't slow. The second he laid eyes on the man, he froze mid-step. The color drained from Thomas's weathered face. His grip on Elias slackened. Royce Venler, he breathed, barely a whisper. The man didn't argue, didn't speak. He limped forward, boots dragging through the mud that Brontis had torn up during the charge. When he came within arm's reach of the bull, Royce raised a trembling hand. Brontis's entire body shuddered. His front leg lifted and then fell back with a soft thud. He stepped back once, then let out a low, rumbling groan, the sound of something ancient breaking open. His head lowered, not in defeat, but in recognition. Then, to everyone's shock, the massive bull collapsed. His knees buckled beneath him, and he dropped into the mud, his body heaving with deep, rhythmic breaths. Royce placed a hand gently behind the bull's ear, his fingers curling into the thick, matted fur. He said nothing, just knelt beside the creature and closed his eyes, letting the weight of 2 decades hang silently between them. That morning, nothing made sense anymore. Elias's mind raced. He stared at the man, at Royce, not Darren Cole, not a stranger anymore. This was the ghost Brontis had waited for, the missing name no one dared speak. The bull hadn't charged to attack. He had charged to reach. Later, after the town slowly settled and Brontis had been led to a shaded corner of the inn's yard, Elias and Thomas sat across from Royce in the quiet dining room. The windows were open to the sound of the wind through pine. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and warm stew. Elias leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "What happened to you?" he asked. Royce's face was hard to read. Lines of exhaustion crossed with a cautious stillness, like a man unsure how far the truth could travel without returning to bury him. He exhaled slowly. "They said I deserted," he said, voice low and even. "But I didn't. I stayed behind to finish something they didn't want finished." Thomas said nothing, his arms folded across his chest. Elias waited. "Project Saber," Royce continued, staring down into his untouched bowl of stew. "Top secret. Field operation under the Palisade Regiment. Experimental training. Brontis was one of 5. We trained them to detect signals, avoid traps, sense movement in terrain machines couldn't handle. I was the senior handler. Brontis was my unit partner." Elias blinked. "You went into combat with him?" "We went where no one else would." Royce glanced up. "It worked. Too well. During our final deployment, I stumbled onto something buried in the network. Our maps, the tracking data, all of it was being sold. Black market. Officers were making deals on the side. Thomas's lips tightened. He'd heard things long ago, but no one ever had proof. I tried to report it, Royce said. The next day we were ambushed. I was shot, left for dead in the jungle. Brontis fought to get me out. But when the chopper came, they took him, left me behind, called it desertion, wrote me off. Elias swallowed hard. But you survived. Barely. Someone local found me. I healed, hid, waited. Royce clenched his jaw. I wasn't ready to fight back then. I am now. Silence settled over the table. Thomas finally spoke. There were whispers. Your name was wiped clean so fast, even old vets didn't know what to believe. Most assumed you were a traitor. Some, like me, weren't so sure. Royce nodded. That was the point. Fear's louder than truth. He turned to Elias. But the last corrupted general died 2 months ago. His grip ended. That's when I knew it was time. Before either of them could respond, a door creaked open at the far end of the hall. Mr. Briggs stepped in, scratching his beard. 2 gentlemen asking about Mirador Ranch, he muttered. Say they're investors. Want to revitalize the valley. Royce stood immediately. How do they look? City types, long coats, smiling too much. Elias felt a chill run down his back. That evening, he slipped behind the inn and watched the men from the tree line. They stood near a rented car, speaking softly, too softly for normal investors. One leaned against the door while the other made a call. We'll remove the obstacles first, the taller one said. He's back. I don't care how he survived. We secure the Mirador property by next week. Elias's stomach turned. He ran back and told Thomas, who recognized one of the names from the old Palisade roster. That one was internal operations, Thomas said. Never wore a uniform in his life, but he buried plenty who did. Royce didn't panic. He simply said, Then we act before they do. That night, Elias followed Royce into the woods behind the lake. Royce moved slowly but with purpose, mapping the trails with chalk and tying strips of cloth to trees. He spoke as he worked. They'll use the South Ridge. That's where we used to enter covert. It hasn't changed. Elias jotted notes. What about weapons? They don't want a gunfight. Too messy. They'll use pressure, force. And if that doesn't work, disappear me again. What do we do? Royce looked at him. We give them what they want, a clear path. Then he smiled. The trap began with misinformation. Thomas, under the cover of sweeping the churchyard, passed word to a few loose tongues that Royce had stashed files in a tin shed near the marsh. Word traveled fast in small towns. By morning, the 2 strangers had moved out of the inn and set up camp in the woods, claiming they were on a survey expedition. Royce and Elias monitored them through the trees. Brontis, now recovered and calm, moved like a shadow at Royce's side. The bull's eyes followed every movement, his breathing slow and controlled. He remembered. On the 3rd night, Royce deliberately let himself be seen carrying a case into the marsh. The men followed. The marsh was treacherous, mud deep enough to swallow boots, thick roots hiding beneath murky water. Elias and Brontis waited on a rise. Royce crouched just below the reeds. As expected, one man moved ahead carelessly, stepping into the heart of the marsh to search for the shed. The ground collapsed beneath him. He shouted, flailed, and disappeared into the bog. The second man turned to flee. Brontis blocked the path. The man stumbled back, panic in his eyes. Royce stepped from the shadows, grabbed him, and slammed him against a tree with a strength Elias hadn't seen before. Who's still running the network? Royce growled. I don't know. Royce pressed harder. Names, or you go in after your partner. I have files, on my phone, messages. They're moving the data to new buyers. Elias stepped forward, recording the entire confession. His hands trembled, but he held the phone steady. When it was over, Royce released the man and shoved him to the ground. Run, he said, and tell whoever's left, I'm alive. Elias ended the recording. They walked back in silence. The boy looked up at Royce, a question forming in his throat. Royce only said, We're not finished yet. And Brontis, he wasn't just a grieving animal. He was a weapon that remembered. They set traps. They spread misinformation. The men didn't suspect a thing until it was too late. Brontis led them into the marsh, where the ground turned to sludge. One man was taken by the mud. The other ran, only to be tackled by Royce and forced to confess everything, recorded by Elias on his phone. The confession spread faster than anyone could have expected. Elias had uploaded the video late at night, his hands trembling as he hovered over the submit button. The confession was raw, uncut, and haunting. It showed a trembling voice admitting to lies, framing an innocent man, and covering up a conspiracy that spanned 2 decades. The truth was out. He hadn't expected the response to come so quickly, but within 48 hours, It came crashing down like a wave. 3 unmarked black SUVs pulled into the Mirador barnyard at dawn. Dust rose from their tires. Royce was already awake, brushing Brontis beneath the sycamores, when the doors opened and 4 men in navy uniforms stepped out. Their gait was sharp, measured, true professionals. The lead officer was a dark-haired man with firm eyes and a nameplate that read, Sergeant. Wellen. He didn't offer a handshake, but his voice held no malice when he said, "We need to talk, and this time, we're actually listening." Royce stood still. His hands didn't flinch. He looked at the uniforms, then at Brontis, who had suddenly grown alert. The bull didn't charge. He simply moved beside Royce like a silent wall. Wellen lifted his hand slowly, showing no threat. "We saw the confession," Wellen said. "We confirmed the identities. One of the men, Burke, he's been found, alive, injured, but in custody now. The other 2, they disappeared a few years back. But we have enough." Royce said nothing. He simply stepped aside. "Then come in." Inside the barn, Royce brought them to a back room beneath the old hayloft. Hidden beneath loose boards and packed straw was a steel lockbox, untouched by time. Royce knelt and opened it, revealing a stack of hand-drawn maps, cassette tapes, coded dossiers, and a worn leather-bound journal. Elias had never seen it before, not in all his time sneaking around the barn. It had been waiting for this moment. And now, it was here. "These," Royce said quietly, "are every move they made. Every drop point. Every name I could track. I kept it all. I wasn't running. I was watching." The officers' expressions hardened. They took photos, bagged evidence, and copied files. But one of them, an older man with weathered eyes, paused. He turned to Royce and said, "We never forgot. We just didn't know who to believe." Royce's jaw clenched. "I didn't expect anyone to believe me. I just wanted it ready for when the truth finally made noise." By the time they left, Royce wasn't in handcuffs. He wasn't interrogated. He wasn't labeled a fugitive anymore. The cloud over his name had started to lift. The wind felt different. Brontis didn't cry at the lake that morning. He simply stood beside Royce as the sun rose behind the barn's broken roof. As word spread, the village of Calderon Valley erupted in whispers. Elias found himself in the center of it all. Reporters showed up outside his uncle's house. One even climbed a tree to photograph Brontis from a distance. But Elias wasn't interested in fame. He met with a regional official one morning in the school auditorium, banners still flapping from the Independence Day fair weeks ago. The official wore a gray suit and a smile that tried too hard. "We'd like to recognize your courage, young man. There's talk of a community award, maybe even a federal—" "No awards," Elias cut in. "I don't want a medal. I want the land protected." The official blinked. "Pardon?" "Mirador," Elias said. "The whole ranch, the lake, the trails, the ridge paths, all of it. I want it designated as a protected sanctuary, for animals, for history, for peace." The man looked flustered. "Well, that's quite a process." "Then start it," Elias replied. "Or I go to the national press, and I name everyone who ignored the signs for years." A silence followed. Then, reluctantly, the man nodded. "We'll begin the paperwork." Royce stood by the back wall, listening. He smiled, not the kind that showed teeth, but the kind that showed approval. Later that evening, as the sunset painted the valley gold, Royce and Elias walked along the old fence line. Brontis paced behind them like a gentle shadow. "You surprised me," Royce said. Elias shrugged. "You saved the bull. I just saved the land." It wasn't long before another voice joined the fray, Thomas. No longer hidden behind the forest edge or disguised beneath a beard, Thomas stepped out from the wilderness and testified before investigators. His story matched Royce's in key areas. He spoke of secret meetings, names he overheard, and instructions whispered during night drills that never made sense. His words helped solidify the investigation, and soon, the entire private syndicate, called Black Harrow, was exposed. The country was shocked. News cycles exploded with theories and headlines. But in Calderon Valley, something else stirred. Young boys walked barefoot to the lake, just to see Brontis with their own eyes. Some brought apples. Others just watched in awe. A story once told in hushed voices had proven true. The bull had waited, and the man had returned. Still, not all wounds healed overnight. Brontis had stopped crying at the lake, but his spirit seemed gentler now. He no longer roamed the fields like a ghost of war. Instead, he followed Royce, always close, always watchful. Royce, in turn, changed too. When a military officer visited to offer him a restored title and a ceremonial uniform, he declined. "I didn't come back to serve again," he said. "I came back to stop what was left behind." Instead, Royce used part of his settlement money to rebuild the northern side of the ranch. He transformed it into a wide compound with reinforced fences, recovery sheds, and quiet woods. He called it Saber Haven. The mission was simple: rescue abandoned service animals, train them gently, and teach young men like Elias how to respect and care for them. The first week, there were only 3 volunteers. By the second month, 15 more had arrived. Boys from nearby villages, former cadets, sons of dismissed soldiers. They learned slowly, but with focus. Some still flinched at the sound of hooves. Others cried the first time a wounded dog let them touch it. And at the center of it all was Brontis, the silent, breathing symbol of what it meant to heal. One quiet evening, Elias found Royce standing at the lake again. The wind stirred gently across the water. Fireflies danced near the reeds. "Do you regret it?" Elias asked softly. Royce didn't answer right away. He stared out at the calm ripples, hands clasped behind his back. "No," he said at last, "but I regret how long it took to come home." At that, Brontis stepped forward, his heavy hooves making no sound on the soft earth. He lowered his massive head and pressed it gently against Royce's chest. A peaceful silence followed. For the first time in 2 decades, the lake felt still. The morning air was still when Royce noticed it. Brontis hadn't risen. He always rose before the sun. Every morning, for nearly a year, the old bull would stir from his place near the pine trees and amble down to the lake with a heavy grace, standing still at its edge as the sky shifted from blue to gold. Royce had never understood what Brontis waited for, what memories kept him returning to that exact spot, staring into the water as if waiting for something lost to return. But this morning, the patch of grass beneath the tall pines remained undisturbed. Royce stepped outside, the wooden porch creaking beneath his boots. His limp was lighter now, but it still caught him on colder mornings. He called out gently, not expecting a response, just out of habit. "Brontis?" His voice cut through the silence like a ripple on water. No answer came. A cold weight settled in Royce's chest. He walked across the dew-wet grass, passing the training pens where young bulls snorted and huffed in their enclosures, already sensing something wasn't right. The sun was just rising when he reached the spot under the trees. Brontis lay curled beneath the oldest pine. His massive body looked calm, still and unmoving, legs tucked under him like he had simply fallen asleep. But the chest didn't rise. His ears didn't flick at Royce's footsteps. His eyes were shut. Royce lowered himself slowly, his hand brushing the bull's broad forehead. It was cold. There was no struggle, no signs of distress. Brontis had simply let go, after 20 years of waiting, after redemption had finally arrived. He sat there for a long time, one hand resting on the bull's neck, his thoughts swimming. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. But something inside him shifted, like the final stone in a long, crooked wall finally found its place. Later that morning, Elias found him there. The boy said nothing at first. He just stood beside Royce and looked down at Brontis, his face pale but steady. "Did he know?" Elias finally asked, his voice soft. Royce didn't look up. "He waited until the truth was heard," he said quietly. "Then he let go." They buried Brontis that afternoon, just the 2 of them at first. Royce dug most of the hole himself, despite Elias offering to take over. "Some things a man finishes on his own," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, breath short but steady. Elias carved the marker. He'd learned stone cutting from Thomas in the evenings after patrol work. The granite slab stood at the lake's edge, right where Brontis used to stand. It read, "He waited until the truth was heard." The town came quietly that evening, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of copper and orange. No speeches, no music, just men in hats and boys in boots, heads bowed, hands on hearts. 1 year had passed since Royce had returned to Calderon, and everything had changed. Saber Haven, once a forgotten patch of overgrown farmland, had transformed into a living sanctuary. Where broken structures once leaned, new fences stood strong. Where silence once ruled, the sound of life returned, barking dogs, lowing bulls, and boys laughing in the distance as they worked side by side. Royce had opened the gates not just for animals, but for boys from the town, many of them with nowhere else to go, or with scars they didn't talk about. They came to learn how to care, how to lead, and how to be men who protected instead of destroyed. Elias had grown into a leader. At 13, he wasn't just following instructions, he was giving them. He rose early, made rounds, helped with new calves, and read Royce's old manuals until his eyes burned. The transformation was quiet but firm. He didn't ask for praise. He earned it. Royce, though still reserved, had softened. He had shaved the beard, cut his hair, and built himself a new study at the back of the house. He spent evenings there, writing by lamplight, putting into words the story that had once nearly broken him. He called it The bull that waited. It wasn't just about Brontis. It was about all of them, about guilt, silence, war, and the quiet force of loyalty. Thomas had passed that spring. His body had simply given out, and he'd died in his sleep. Royce found him on the porch, a coffee mug still in hand. The funeral drew more people than the town had seen in decades. Men who'd once served beside him, boys he'd mentored, neighbors who hadn't known his full story, but had seen the way he carried pain with dignity. Royce spoke briefly at the funeral. Thomas never needed attention to do good, he said. He was the quiet backbone of a broken system. Brontis had stood silently behind the crowd, unmoving, as if understanding the weight of the moment. Months passed. And then, the letter came. It was addressed to Saber Haven, handwritten, the envelope smeared with international stamps. Elias brought it to Royce during lunch. "It's for you," the boy said, tilting his head curiously. Inside was a simple note. The handwriting was young, hesitant. Royce's hands trembled as he read it. He opened the small envelope inside and found the drive. When he plugged it into his computer, his chest tightened. It was footage, hidden recordings, documents, surveillance logs from a remote base, carefully scanned. And there, clear as day, was the man who had framed him. The same crooked grin, the same scar over the eye, speaking things into a mic he didn't know was live, laughing about leaving Royce holding the bag. Royce exhaled slowly. For a moment he couldn't speak. Then calmly he picked up the phone. Within days, 2 men in plain black jackets arrived. One was older, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. "We've been waiting for this," he said simply. "You ready to travel?" Royce nodded. "Let's finish this." The hearing was closed door, somewhere quiet and remote. Royce testified clearly, finally unburdened by years of silence. The boy's letter had unlocked everything. And when it was over, when the man who framed him was finally exposed, Royce walked out into the sunlight and took a deep breath. He came home 2 days later, greeted by Elias at the front gate. "Did it work?" the boy asked, barely containing his hope. Royce smiled, really smiled, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's done," he said. "All of it." But the celebration was brief. That very week, Brontis didn't rise. And so, the town gathered once more, not for trial or justice or anger, but to lay down something precious. They came in boots and clean shirts, caps pressed to their chests, many with sons standing quietly at their sides. No one spoke for long. No one needed to. The lake shimmered gently in the background. Years passed, and Saber Haven only grew. Boys became men. Dogs found homes. Bulls trained for patrols that saved towns from fire, thieves, and chaos. Royce's limp never fully left, but it no longer slowed him. His book hit shelves quietly, spreading in veteran circles, read in silence by men who never spoke of their past. It brought tears. It brought healing. But for Elias, the lake remained something more. He visited often, standing alone at the grave beneath the pines, reading the words carved in stone. It wasn't just a memorial. It was a reminder, a compass. Where a boy met a ghost turned into a man, and a bull taught the world how loyalty outlasts silence.